Chapter 3. The fighting tournament was held in Torshavn, the capital of the Faroe Islands, just by the harbour where they had the major music festivals and where the Smearline cruise ship brought and deposited visitors new and old to the Faroe Islands. The entire area was cordoned off and a ring was erected with cameras and large screens to magnify the action for those not lucky enough to be at the front. People had filled the square to watch the proceedings. The fighters were separated by age and weight, and then the fighting would begin. Hogni and his family had managed to get a seat close to the ring, as his father Peter had called in a few favours so they could see all the action close up. The official opening of the tournament was started by the Prime Minister of the Faroe Islands, who waffled on about boys becoming men and how he hoped to see some good displays of courage and skill during the contest. He was sat behind a table next to the judges, who graded any fight that wasn't won outright. In front of him, he had the belts for each of the respective age categories and the Ultimate Fighter of the Tournament award, which then would be presented to the lucky few once the fighting was over. Hogni turned, looking around the square, and saw Bita speaking to Yekvan. She smiled warmly and waved him over. Beside her, Yekvan looked over at him with unabashed hate. Hogni shook his head and gestured to his brother and his families around him, indicated that he would stay where he was. His parents, Peter and Ruth, were there to watch the fighting with him, as was Hannes and Ella, his little sister. Ella didn't pay much attention to the fights, and was clearly unimpressed by the whole affair, as she yawned and slept through most of it. In contrast, Hannes had clenched fists and made boxing fight noises throughout the bouts, getting into the action. Yekvan was the favourite to win the 13 to 15-year-old division, despite the age gap between him and the other contestants. He had obviously been training hard. There were rumours at school that his dad had hired an ex-heavyweight boxing champion to put him through an extreme training programme, and he was certainly displaying his pedigree. Yekvan's friends, Liva and Chris, won a couple of their fights, but got knocked out of the competition in the semi-finals. Whereas Yekvan didn't even seem to break sweat. So far, the three bouts he'd pummeled and harassed his opponents so much that their corners had thrown in the towel. In the semi-finals, he was against a huge 15-year-old boy who came out quickly and put the pressure on Yekvan. But Yekvan avoided the ropes, switched round and switched up the speed of his punches, hitting effortlessly at the older boy's body and face. It turned into a slaughter. Disturbingly, Yekvan kept looking over at Hogni while he picked apart his opponent. Yekvan then ducked, rolled, and unleashed a right cross to the jaw of his opponent, who, even though he was wearing a protective helmet like all of the competitors, fell as though his legs had been taken from him. The boy's eyes glazed over, staring into nothing as he fell to the ground. Wow. The crowd was stunned at the display. For 5 long seconds it was quiet, and then the entire square went wild, cheering his name and clapping his victory. Hogni clapped along with everyone else, but his mouth was dry. Yekvan still hadn't broken eye contact with him. He didn't like the feeling of foreboding he had. All of the various age categories were awarded with their belts and given time for a brief speech where they thanked the crowd and their supporters and trainers. When it came to Yekvan, he was awarded the Ultimate Fighter of the tournament, along with his winner's belt. He thanked the Prime Minister, his father, and his mother, who beamed at their son proudly, standing up from their seats applauding. Then Yekvan turned, and Hogni felt a cold bead of sweat go down his neck. Lastly, I'd like to thank the coward, Hogni, who is so frightened of fighting in the tournament that he hides behind his mother's skirts, or rather, he wears one and hides behind that instead. There was a collective intake of breath, and some jeering and laughing to be heard, or that was mainly from Yekvan's friends. The title of Lightbearer should go to the strongest man and the most capable to be the protector of the Faroe Islands. Me. Hogni, I challenge you for the title of Lightbearer. A voice rang out and silenced Yekvan before he could continue. Enough. The stone made its decision. The Lightbearer is no paltry belt to be fought over. It's tradition. It's our heritage. The figure walked through the crowd as though he was walking on water towards the ring. It was only the priest of the old god, Sieta. No one knew how old he was, but he'd been old since Huknir's grandfather's time. He pointed accusingly at Yekvan's father. "Cease this foolishness, you vain man, blowing on your son's ego like a blacksmith on hot coals. And for what end? To get something that was never yours to promise your son to begin with?" It should have been. Look at him, your light bearer, quaking in his boots. Some continuance of a legendary lineage you have there. And with that, Yekvan's father stormed away from the ring, through the crowd, with Yekvan and his wife in tow. "Come here and say that to me, fat boy," Pieter shouted at the retreating figure of Yekvan's father. "I am still the light bearer. Deny me also." "Don't worry, I'll come to you." Yekvan's father, still moving, looking over his shoulder at Huknir's dad, started sweating. Whatever he saw in Pieter's eyes quickly put out any fire of indignation he may have felt, and he swallowed hard and walked even quicker. Yekvan shouted again, looking back and locking eyes with Huknir. "Coward! I'll show the world what you really are." Huknir sat there, red-faced, as everyone stared at him. As people started to walk away, his father put his hand on his shoulder and told him to ignore the foolish talk. Huknir wasn't so sure about what was just boastful talk and what wasn't any more.